For 20 years, we've been creating innovation in the CX industry, and now we're seeking out brilliant new perspectives on CX you just won't find anywhere else. I'm Richard Owen. Welcome to the CX Iconoclast. Joe Wheeler, most recently author of The Digital First Customer Experience, is a repeat offender. Seemingly unfazed by his first appearance on the podcast, and reputation apparently no worse for wear, he's back to catch us all up with reactions he's had to the book. The best thing about discussions with Joe is that you don't really know where it's going to go before you start, but you're pretty sure you're going to enjoy the journey. Well, that's sort of half true of the many airline flights I take these days. We do cover customer lifetime value, personalized digital pricing, and of course, climate change, which somehow works its way into the conversation. Budweiser and Cadillac, but not at the same time, kids. I do hope you enjoyed this as much as we did making it. Well, Joe Wheeler, welcome back. Thanks very much. It's nice to see you.
Great to be invited back, Richard. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'd like to say that, we have a very, very high bar for people coming back for a second time around. I'd like to say that, but it would not necessarily be an accurate reflection of the truth here. But we are excited to have you come back, especially the last conversation, I think got a lot of great feedback and a lot of additional questions. But I'd love to start just asking about how things have progressed since you published the book. Time passes, more people have had exposure to it. If you got any sense of what people agree with or take issue with when it comes to the ideas you've pushed out?
Yeah, well, three things have really, great question. So three things have really sort of found some traction. One is the whole point around growth and how companies, and the examples in the book, as you recall, Richard, are like Spotify and Lemonade, and how companies are using machine learning to create that digital flywheel, that personalization flywheel. So that really has taken hold. I've done a lot of talks on it, worked with clients around it. And that is what's powerful because, the key part of machine learning is the learning part, right? It's like when we train these platforms, they get smarter and so they can create more personalization that's more relevant, et cetera. The second one is cost. Like, one of my case studies since the book told me that they're looking at 100 core processes that they'll apply generative AI to improve their OpEx. Now, they didn't go on record as to how much money they thought they would save, but it's pretty significant for sure. And then the third one is just around scale, which we talked about last time. What's nice about technology and AI is that if you can still create a strong, powerful, emotional outcome for customers with an AI generated bot or virtual agent, it allows you to scale in a way that's kind of limitless, quite honestly. So those are three things that have kind of really resonated since the book.
Because I'm shamelessly interested in business economics, this idea of cost is kind of where I always end up going. And, there's two angles to that. There's the AI is going to eat your job angle, but there's also the, how do people think about this in terms of its cost impact? Do you get any sense of that?
Yeah, there's the labor piece of it for sure. There's some things that machine learning and AI are just designed to do really well, obviously. Like at Lemonade, they don't have a single human being push new code out. Their DevOps process is completely automated, has been, period. Because it's just more efficient, it's better quality, it just happens perfectly, right? So there are things like that. And that's where I think they see a lot of the operational cost savings. From the labor savings, you and I can both look at lots of companies like Chipotle, are piloting their new food production process. And basically that will have humans doing a few specific things, but then technology creating your bowls and things like that. So you've got to believe over time, that'll probably have some labor savings impact for them. At the same time, what we noticed from working with Amazon is their just walkout technology really has helped jobs be designed in a way that's more fulfilling to cashiers. So rather than being a cashier, actually now I'm a customer service person at these Hudson newsstands. So, I think it cuts both ways, Richard. In some ways, it creates great job opportunities. And in other ways, as I'm sure you've read the same McKinsey and BCG studies I have, some industries will see job reduction. Some industries will, like healthcare, will see job growth.
Yeah, I like the way you talk about prioritizing investments, in that context and in some others, as distinct from implementing whatever seems to be a good idea at any given point in time. Would you like to summarize your thoughts on that for our audience?
Well, I was asked this question the other day by someone that said, so on this question of cost, and I said, at the end of the day, for a specific company, what matters is your design and your brand promise. So what's the brand promise you're delivering? And once you work backwards from that promise, what's the right combination of human, technology, and logistical assets you'll pull together to deliver on that and exceed expectations at key touch points? Like, one thing I know for sure that hasn't changed is if you understand your customer segment and what they truly value in terms of 3 to 5 core attributes, and then design to those attributes in a way that's competitively superior, you won't lose. Now, does that mean you'll introduce more technology? Maybe not. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, Richard, you'll laugh at this. I was working with AT&T on their new store design and Maxine Clark on the new Build-A-Bear workshop store. Here's what's funny. Here's a technology company like AT&T, and the big innovation they had for their new store was a desk with 3 chairs. And here's a highly emotional, customer experience and Build-A-Bear workshop who invested massively in technology for taking the heart ceremony and automating it. And I remember in the middle of those 2 projects, I thought, I know nothing about this stuff.
Yeah, I think that what you're saying is important, because it's coming at it from the outcome you're trying to accomplish backwards, and technology then becomes a useful servant for solving problems, as opposed to constantly sort of driving to replace people simply because that's intrinsically seems like a good idea, right? It's kind of the cost up approach versus the top down. Let's not be naive. People are going to continue to look at this from a pure cost reduction perspective, because if you can do that, well, it's always going to be tempting. But a lot of contact center experiences to me feel like the starting point is not how do we serve customers cost effectively, but how do we just get cost out of this thing?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Well, and it's funny, I'm a longtime Expedia customer. I've always liked Expedia. I think they've kind of taken the digital path, which is okay. And like here's the thing: we will select in or select out based on our experience, right? So, that's not a bad thing. That's a choice that they'll make. And at the end of the day, if a customer who really needs more human interaction support, they'll find an alternative. So I do think it comes down to this combination of the experience you're trying to deliver, the business model that supports that, and then the tech stack and labor strategy that's going to deliver on that consistently all the time. That's the hard part in business, as always. How do you do it consistently?
Well, and I wonder how much of this is also varying by customer segment and demographic, right? So the old story in banking used to be, if you're over 50, you couldn't imagine not going into a branch. If you were under 30, you don't know what a branch is. And that's somewhat changed with COVID, right? Because I think we took a whole generation of people, right, older people, and said, branch is dangerous. Here's mobile tools. And they suddenly realized, well, it's not as intimidating as we thought.
Yeah. No. Yes. No, I heard an executive from Bank of America talking about this very topic the other day, where she was asked, don't you kind of skew younger with your mobile apps and she said, no. She's like, no. Don't think about demographics anymore around mobile access and things like that. Like, it's really not the best schema to think of. I will say, though, I think what is interesting, and that's why we call the book, Richard, as digital first, is I think customers are expecting that often their first interaction with a brand will probably be digital. I mean, when's the last time any of us went to a store and didn't go online and look for the product that we might be interested in, or look at the mobile app? And in the store, it's pretty typical, because stores are now embedding a lot of technology from avatars, etc., for virtual waiting rooms and things like, or trying on things. That technology is just being more immersive into our buying experiences, and typically will be sort of the lead that we may start with. And I think there is consumer demand around that across demographics.
Maurice had a rather mischievous question picked out about the performance of companies that ultimately get selected by book authors. Maurice, why did you pick that one up?
Yes. I mean, Now, let's understand before I give the details. Fred Reichheld and I get along just fine, and I've been a guest a dozen times on Rob Markey's podcast. Fred he fell into a trap in he and his co-author's latest book. He said, look, in this old way of developing business strategy, as evidenced by In Search of Excellence and other books, the companies that have been picked out as exemplars have done badly since then. And then he picked out Warby Parker, Chewy, Peloton, and Airbnb as the examples of customer love, the models that we should all be following. You have been quite outspoken in your support of this perspective as well. Since publishing the book, the average stock price decline of those four companies is over 80%.
Which we're not suggesting was a causal relationship.
Yes. What do you think that Fred and his co-authors got wrong with this analysis?
Oh, that's a great question, Maurice. Boy, let me try to give you a thoughtful answer, because it happens. Like when Jim Haskett and Earl Sasser and I wrote The Ownership Quotient, we had companies that we featured like Wegmans Food Markets that is doing well, Fairmont Hotels. Halfway through the book, 3 of them went private. So we're a little bit worried about how their Caesars Entertainment went through a very tough time, right?
Sure, I get that. And clearly closer to your own home, Lemonade is down 76% from its peak as of a couple of days ago. Nike's down about 40%.
Yeah. Well, but here's the thing. I guess I would say is, at the end of the day, business cycles are business cycles, and companies go up and down for lots of different reasons. And as Lou Gerstner said when he took over IBM, remember the stock price had hit the bottom. And analysts said, Lou, what are you going to do to get the stock price up? He said, I don't manage the stock price. I just manage our products and services. That's the only thing I can do to have a positive impact, right? So, he's pretty articulate. But here's what I think. When we look at like the business model underlying Lemonade, to me, that's an incredibly robust, progressive business model for that industry. That will kind of be the future for how things will go, quite honestly, in terms of how we expect to buy insurance and leverage it. So I think at the end of the day, what we try to do when we look at these companies is understand, is the business model something that's durable, that's been well thought out, and that has some level of predictive operating margin over time, knowing that, in fact, business is just cyclical for lots of companies. Nike is another great example of a company that, lived through COVID pretty well compared to other retailers. They actually drove a lot of their sales through their digital channels when the pandemic hit better than others. But again, it's like customers are always changing. That's why I make this whole chapter around how you really understand the customer experience and customer preferences in a constant way, a test and learn kind of way versus in a static way with an annual customer satisfaction survey, which is sort of irrelevant.
I'd like to pick up on that in a second, because you obviously threw that piece of meat out for us to bite down on. But I'm drawn to this conversation about performance of companies, and I'm reminded of the old joke that when you look at John Lennon or John F. Kennedy, the moral of the tale is, mothers, don't name your children after airports because they'll get assassinated. Causality is a strange thing most people don't understand, and the implication I was thinking is, if you want to maintain your stock price, don't do interviews with prominent authors, because it's basically the kiss of death. Fred Reichheld, Joe Wheeler, that'll put a dent in your stock price the moment you do that. But I think Maurice's question was an interesting one, because superficially you look at these stories and you say they don't hold up terribly well, but maybe the core problem here is that we have trouble balancing customer experience or customer focus or customer success, any way you want to put it, with the broader set of business deliberations, right? This is a very complicated formula for success, right? No one's suggesting, by the way, that Peloton's performance financially was a consequence of their investment in customer delight, right? It wasn't like, should, all those happy customers are killing you, man. You should basically rely on a lot more upset customers. It's
What what I took away from that analysis was the customer love aspect is great and certainly helps, but it's far from being enough. Customer love doesn't help you if you've got major, gigantic issues in your supply chain.
Well, I also wonder, Maurice, whether or not sometimes this kind of fanatical level of customer support blinds businesses to the true nature of their financial operations, right? So Peloton is a company that I think is a simple example of that, because you can make an argument that they got so far out in front of their skis because they started to consume their own mythology in some ways, right? When they went public, their addressable market was the entire universe of exercise for the entire planet. Well, that might be a little bit optimistic, but this kind of almost cult following tends to result in cult stocks and tends to result in big crashes. You could argue Tesla is at the early stages of experiencing that negative effect of cult following. And so is it that managers consume a little too much of their own mythology when they are essentially so popular with their customers?
Yeah. I don't know. That's a great question. I mean, it is an interesting time, Richard and Maurice, because I mean, think of the problems you can create by just misjudging the market in marketing. You know, Budweiser went through a terrible experience. Remember about 4 months ago? And like there was literally boycott Bud. You know, it's like all over the place. I mean, that marketing manager must have been like, so I mean, the market will reward you greatly and also just take you down quickly in 2024 and beyond from social channels and things like that. So there is a whole level of like nuance that I think marketing managers are paying attention to these days that could impact that. At the same time, I do think, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think Budweiser is a touchy topic. This one, not one. You're brave to venture into that discussion, but I do think it illustrates the risk of not understanding your customers at the end of the day. Right. Who is it that buys your product? Yes. And the segmentation of your customers and where you want to grow. I mean, if you look beyond the emotional response to Budweiser, the real question was, is that a brand that's capable of growing outside its core audience, satisfying the needs of a non-core audience while still keeping its core audience on side? And that's a challenge, segmentation challenge, I think a lot of companies run into when they grow and scale. Cadillac, right? People, the term, the Cadillac of minivans, or the Cadillac, was meant as a term of affection 30 years ago. That meant you were the top. Now, right. Cadillac's no longer the Cadillac of cars.
Yeah.
So your audience and your demographic shifts, and to some extent, you need to adapt, which is how these banks, I think, have adapted. But I want to pick up on your observation about surveys. So pick that one up, because you were about to say something that's near and dear to our heart, which was, in a digital environment, what is the future for surveys? Or, is this sort of, your granddad's technology now?
I think it is. I mean, you look at this data more often than I do, Richard, but like the level of survey fatigue. I bet if we all went into our emails right now and looked at the number of requests we've had for a survey, you'd probably have 15 in there from Expedia or the last hotel you stayed in, things like that. And they all range in terms of their design. I got a survey request from a customer experience organization, and I clicked on it because I've got a relationship with them. There wasn't even a status bar at the top. I'm like, seriously, basic survey design. Tell me how long this is going to take before I invest it. So I don't know. I think we're still on this research effort to try to figure out how we can score engagement. Because my view is that we'll start to really design and calculate lifetime value much differently than we have in the past. And rather than try to say, hey, Richard, how engaged are you on a 1 to 10 scale? I should be able to extract that. I should be able to kind of infer that based on your digital behaviors and your online behaviors. I shouldn't have to send you a survey to find out how happy or just unhappy you are. I think there's so much data that machine learning and AI will help us really be able to predict that, and then be able to design either human or digital responses based on how you're scoring on engagement, connected to your spending over time and your likelihood to spend over time. That's what I think the future is around measuring customer experience. And you guys are, you're all over
Well,
this.
wouldn't it be great if some startup was off doing that? That'd be really exciting.
This is not a planted question for your viewers. This
Thanks.
is literally,
the check is in the post, Joe. It's not a big check. It's not a big check.
Exactly. Well, it's probably Canadian dollars too, so I probably can't do anything with it.
But I like the path you're starting to go down on customer lifetime value, because one of the general challenges, even in the short term, is that there just isn't a standard definition for it. And people mean different things by it. As you say, even the way that we may want to measure and calculate it will change over time. And do you have any thoughts or advice about a simple definition that works, as distinct from asking a very sophisticated CFO to define it in a way that takes 5 minutes to explain, right? It's how can we reduce it to something that someone can grasp in a sentence or two and that's accurate?
Well, I mean, the classic definition for customer lifetime value, as you know, is just the stream of revenue you can count on over the lifetime of a customer, discounted by, a 5% discount rate or whatever your rate is. So it's kind of the stream of revenues that you can expect from a specific customer segment. Gary Loveman, when he was the CEO of Caesars, to me was kind of the most advanced business leader in terms of understanding how lifetime value correlated to marketing and customer experience design. I mean, he really connected those two things. So everyone at the Caesars operation understood the value of a gold versus a platinum versus a 7-star. But I think with digital, what's changing is like a company like Spotify and Lemonade, like they're able to calculate lifetime value. I don't want to say in real time because not everyone's a streaming giant like them, so they don't have the level of data interactions, but pretty close to it, and link that to average revenue per user. And that informs content decisions, a whole bunch of operational decisions. I mean, Spotify, their head of machine learning said, we think this could be the primary metric for our company. I mean, that's, to me, a really big statement to say. But not everyone will have that much data on their customers. But I do think the missing X is engagement. And this is what we're trying to solve for. If you could score engagement in a way that was predictable with like, that could explain the variation, and break that down into 3 to 5 attributes for a company that you could measure passively with customers, then I think you start to see the relationship between engagement and how that generates revenue over time. And then you can create a more dynamic measure, Maurice. So that's what we're trying to solve for right now. We don't have the answer, but we're getting closer.
Yeah, the classical way of doing it in pure finance terms is discounted cash flow, which is a complex calculation. And the most superficial way that I can think of doing it at a macro level, which I would submit is accurate, is that I think a CEO or a CFO would agree that the value of their company on the stock market and the value of their customers is identical, unless they've got some other source of revenue. So if you've got 1,000 equally sized customers and your company is that much value, then you divide by 1,000 and that's the value of the customers. But
that's
is that excessively simple?
Yeah. Well, assumes the stock market's correctly valuing your business. I mean, the argument there would be that if your customers are worth more than your market capitalization, then there's a buying opportunity. If it's inverse, then it's time to short the stock, right? And I think of the work that, if people are interested, Peter Fader and co do out of Wharton, which is, really looking at this, how do you educate Wall Street around it? But I'm interested in your comment about engagement, because we talk about that. You have a very specific sense of what engagement means. That maybe it's not fully quantified yet, but perhaps talk to us a bit more about why you think engagement is such a key measure in the digital world, and how you think of engagement.
Yeah, I guess there's been so many studies, like in the ownership quotient, when we did the original research for that, Richard, what Jim and Earl and I learned was that, Fred talks about a super promoter, like a promoter, but then like people who are. And when we did the research, we had a couple of clients that agreed to be the case studies. What we noticed was that the value of their, quote, owners, people who we would describe as really committed to that brand, was just 10x, more than 10x than even top box score customers. So there is a subsegment of your customers who are real brand advocates, and they're highly engaged. And when you look at different studies, in like one study in engagement describes it with 5 attributes, 3 of which are measurable around attention, absorption, and enthusiasm. Like you could measure how enthusiastic I am about a brand by different behaviors, how much attention, like do I spend a lot of time online, and what's my absorption level. So you could get to attributes around that define engagement. And if you did that, then you could start to measure that in a passive way so that you're not asking customers, are you engaged? And then you could start to relate that to their spending behaviors over time. So that's the concept, is to say, well, boy, if we could score engagement in a way that's like top quartile, bottom quartile, to understand which customers are high, then we could figure out how to move that distribution. It's a little bit what Fred and Rob did with MPS, which was good, right? It said, hey, distribute your customers and figure out how do you get passive becomes promoters? How do you get, reduced detractors? Same idea. Take that model, apply it to engagement, because I think, here's the thing, especially in a digital first world where I can turn you off with a click, right? It's like I can disappear on you and you might not see me for a long time. I think you want to pay attention to engagement in a way today than you have in the past.
And I'd say, the B2B SaaS industry has embraced that through through telemetry of product usage, right? So in that market, a lot of companies have focused on really what the equivalent of engagement is, which is usage. And they're looking at people consuming the product, and they really want to understand that. And it turns out to be a really valuable contributor to overall repurchase. It's not necessarily causal in the sense that the reason people are using the product is the real problem, right? So if the product's misfit or it's not good enough quality, whatever, that's why people aren't using it. So there's a risk of focusing on usage as a root cause when it's really an outcome. Mm-hmm. But if you think about engagement, which for a lot of consumer brands is the equivalent, right? I think that's where you're making the argument. It's a level of consumption of the product. And so that data set becomes extremely interesting in looking at its linkage between ultimate repurchase or continuation of purchase. I think that there's a risk of it just becoming clickbait, right? We're not here just to drive engagement for the sake of it. People have to get value, don't they? I mean, that's the point.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I'm sure you know, because you do so much work in B2B, you see, I don't think SaaS models are running towards usage models, but you're seeing more of it. Like before we got on this call, I was working on our pricing model for my other business, which is a machine learning based AI platform that'll use usage versus subscription. Because to your point, when you're really tracking, when usage is basically your pricing model, if people are using it or not, and they're paying for what they need versus, a subscription fee. And how many times have we looked at our subscription fees and thought, why am I paying $50 a month for this? I don't even remember the last time I used it. So this is a good model for ensuring that your customers are engaged. And if they're not, how do you change that?
So you're saying engagement's a proxy for value, right? So essentially we're getting to more value-based pricing because we're pricing on consumption. Yeah, it makes it, but essentially in a digital world, pricing could turn into quite a very different set of much more personalized pricing, right? You're advocating.
Exactly. Absolutely. But doesn't that make sense if we get really good at personalization? And remember, consumers talk, what we learned from the research for the book, this already, but consumers talk through both sides of their mouth on personalization. It's like, I don't want to share my private data, but I really love to benefit from everyone else sharing their private data.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's also, thank you advertisers for taking my personal data and then shamelessly trying to sell it back to me. So we've become suspicious of personalization because we think it's just going to be a marketing tool, and it really is sometimes.
Yeah, from your lips to God's ear. I lost my wallet in Boston about a month ago, and that's a terrible experience these days because you think, especially in the MIT campus, who the heck could have found it? Anyway. I can't believe the number of ads I got for a new wallet. I'm like, how did they know I lost my wallet?
Yeah, that's a little scary. We're sort of running out of time here, Joe. I just wanted to close by a completely different topic. You'd mentioned earlier when we were talking in prep for this, your involvement with climate change initiatives, et cetera. Yeah. And I thought it'd be an interesting note to close on. It's got, obviously, I can't spot an obvious immediate connection with customer experience, but you'd recently been to the COP summit, and I think that you'd shared some interesting observations around that. And this is obviously a passion for you. How you're now balancing climate work with customer engagement and digital work. So yeah, I mean, good for you. What do you see? Do you square these two away, or do you just think of them as interesting different topics?
Well, luckily I have youth on my side, Richard.
Yeah, thank goodness we all do, right? I mean, it'd be terrible otherwise.
No, basically, honestly, so the other company I started with a partner of mine from in the software industry in the Valleys called Blue Movement. And Blue Movement is focused on a platform as a service that can help eliminate the barriers in understanding how to analyze, how to collect, analyze, and act on ocean data. It's a tricky topic because there's so much data. There's lots of challenges to doing that because devices don't communicate well. There's privacy issues, a whole range of things. So we're solving that by applying machine learning and AI in such a way that we're able to deal with the privacy issues and be able to upload data from devices that are typically very hard to communicate with. So it's a very exciting thing. Actually, my partner is in New Orleans today speaking at the Ocean Sciences Conference. But, you know, quite honestly, machine learning and AI can make a big difference on climate. Like, it can have a massive impact in terms of understanding how close we are getting to these tipping points, what actions we can take. So I feel like there's a whole conversation around the role of AI, especially generative AI, which we will build into this product as a way to help scientists and people managing assets and marine assets in a way that'll give them insights that they just never had before, quite honestly. So there's a whole place here for us to understand how we apply machine learning, these platforms, to the environment that lots of great companies are doing. And it actually is quite inspiring, Richard and Maurice, quite honestly, you know, just because I'm not a half glass full or half glass empty. It's like, let's just go figure out how we get the glass full. You know what I mean? Failure's not an option. So, you know, no, listen, maybe you guys have seats reserved on Elon Musk's spaceship to Mars. I know I don't. But I'm not counting on that flight. I'm counting on us staying on Earth and making this place as beautiful.
No. I think you're right. That's absurd. I mean, when there's options to go for cryogenics, why would anyone want the spaceship to Mars? I don't understand. I think it's really interesting what you're doing, in part because I have a suspicion, and we'll find out 100 years from now. When we're all just kicking around doing the 30th edition of this podcast, I think that we'll find out that technology has been the answer, right? Yeah. I mean, I think we know technology is the answer in the history of mankind. That's how it gets solved. Human ingenuity is pretty much limitless. I mean, if you go down the sort of Peter Diamandis point of view, which I do subscribe to, yeah, we're smart enough as a species to solve any problem. Yes, with technology, maybe not with politics, it's a different topic, but with technology, we have almost unlimited potential. And so just what you described then is something would never have occurred to me, but this impact of machine learning on helping us understand these choices. That's a topic for our next conversation, I hope, because that's also pretty exciting. Joe, it's fabulous seeing you. You are a true iconoclast and working on all kinds of interesting things. So congratulations on that, and continue to contribute to the debate. We're great seeing you again.
Well, and last thing, so this platform, our project in Barbados got nominated for the Earthshot Prize for the second time. We didn't win the first time, but they renominate you. So I still might stare into Prince.
And how many years do they keep renominating you? I mean, is there a statistical point at which you simply can't fail to win?
Exactly. I'm just going to get tired of my applications and just give it to me.
Thanks, Joe. We appreciate it.
Great to see you guys. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the CX Iconoclast from OCX Cognition. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you won't miss any of our thought-provoking conversations. And please get in touch if you want to learn more about what OCX Cognition's predictive CX analytics platform can do for your business by providing complete insights into every account, continuously updated and connected to operations. You'll find contact info in the show notes.